Welcome to the Economic Standing Policy Committee meeting for Wednesday, March the 24th. I'm going to begin with the acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I'll now ask our City Clerk to do a roll call.
Mayor Spearman. Councillor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Kaufman.
Present.
Councillor Crowson.
Here.
Councillor Morrow.
Yeah.
Councillor Parker.
Here.
Acting Mayor Hagan.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Miyashiro. I think he can't attend today. Mayor Spearman.
Present.
And Councillor Campbell.
Ici, Madame.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Now adoption of the agenda. The agenda was circulated prior to the meeting. I have a resolution from Vice Chair Carlson that the agenda of the Economic Standing Policy Committee meeting on March 24th, 2021 be adopted as presented. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Any changes or additions to the agenda from anyone?
I haven't heard of any.
Seeing nothing, I'll call for the vote.
A question has been called. All in favor? Any opposed? There are none. Thank you. Okay, consent agenda. Be it resolved that the minutes of, from Councillor Carlson, again, the minutes of the Economic Standing Policy Committee meeting held on Wednesday, March the 10th, 2021 be approved, and the Mayor and the City Clerk be authorized to sign the same. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you again, Mayor Spearman. I trust my colleagues had a chance to look through the minutes. I scanned them quickly and didn't notice anything, so I'm just asking if anyone saw anything. If there's none, I'll call for the vote.
Okay, so far nothing. Question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? There are none.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to presentations. Presentations be limited to 10 minutes. And we'll start with Haley Pinkston, City Treasurer, the Capital Improvement Program update.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman, and members of Economic. Just before we jump into what we describe as Section D days in CIP, just wanted to give some background and context in terms of what that will look like over the next several economic SPC meetings. And so if you just jump to the next slide, just to kind of give an overview of what that will look like. So on slide 3, just talking about the schedule in terms of the upcoming economic SPC days and some of the information related to the CIP process and in that process and what's upcoming in terms of deliberation week and some other important dates on the schedule coming up. On slide 4, it does kind of summarize high level the projects that will be on each day. Just important to keep in mind that those might fluctuate just given some of the things that have been coming over the wall recently. I know Mr. Kelly's talked to you about a few projects that will potentially be slotted in for April 28th, just to consider depending on some decisions that are made, and also there just might be some changes of timing if a specific group is not available, or so this isn't necessarily set in stone, but just trying to kind of break out which projects will be going on which day. The other thing that will be coming on the 28th is the project scoring that happens. So several months ago, Council approved a priority matrix in terms of scoring all of the Section D projects, and so a group has gone away and done that scoring and will be providing that information on the 28th in terms of another snippet of information for council to consider when exploring and understanding these projects. So this schedule is subject to change, but just wanted to kind of give you a high level overview of the projects that will be coming on each day. The other thing that's happened since I don't know necessarily if it was the last economic, but another update that to provide to council is, which is on the next slide. The provincial budget was announced. We've got some estimated forecasts in terms of dollar values. So we've updated kind of our available forecast to the end of 2025 related to the announcements in the provincial budget. This is still a forecast and will likely continue to evolve until budget deliberations as additional information comes forward or we learn about additional potential funding opportunities. Just a few things to note. At council yesterday, there was some ICIP projects approved that had a matching component, so that those dollars have been taken out of this available. And also this is based on the assumption that the $6.8 million related to the Performing Arts Center is included in what's available. So had to make some assumptions there. So if that's an incorrect assumption, then we would just need to revise this funding depending on council's direction. So that is just a high level overview. There's roughly $52 million available in terms of funding projects within Section D, and just kind of gives you a high level overview of the available funding. And that is just kind of high level summary of context in terms of what Section D projects will look like over the next 4 economic meetings, and just some of additional information for council or economic SPC.
Okay, thank you, Haley. Any questions? Okay, so that completes 4.1. Okay. Okay, we have a motion from, again, Councillor Carlson. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receives the presentation as information.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thanks for the information and update, Haley. I'll call for the vote.
Question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? There are none. Thank you. Okay, now we'll move on to 4.2. See, we have Perry Stein with us to discuss Indigenous Relations Office CIP project submissions. Mr. Stein.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for allowing me to be the first of your 4 sessions of Section D projects. I appreciate that. I have 2 projects that I'm going to be presenting today, and I'll try to stick to that 10-minute mark. So the first project is the next phases of work for the Indigenous Cultural Center. So you can go to the next slide, please. If you recall, in the last capital budget, City Council provided funding to do a feasibility study that was presented to City Council in February of last year. We've identified a few next steps for this project to move it forward, including solidifying a proposed governance framework, which was an outcome of the last scope of work that we completed, identifying a preferred location for this facility, creating a business case for City Council to consider in a separate ask in terms of acquiring land, completing a comprehensive site plan, and completing detailed design for an outdoor gathering place. Next slide, please. I won't go into too much depth in terms of precedent work, but just to quickly review, the idea of an Indigenous Cultural Center has been in the community for quite some time. And in terms of city-led projects, it goes back to 2007 with the Heart of Our City Master Plan, and then through a number of other documents, including most recently in the National Choir into Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls work plan and the Reconstruction Master Plan that was approved yesterday. To date, as I mentioned, we have completed a feasibility study for this facility, as well as some governance planning that was completed last year as well. This was probably the project that the city has done with the most Indigenous community engagement to date. We engaged over 40 organizations, both in the city and regionally, and in the community, held a two-day conference, interviews, focus groups, workshops. So really the purpose of that feasibility study was to have a better understanding at a community level of what an ICC is or could be, and to come to consensus with that vision with the broader community. Next slide, please. Again, I won't go into too much detail because this is all information we presented previously to council. These are some of the main engagement findings about some of the key features or opportunities related to an Indigenous cultural center. The piece that I think is most important is the opportunity that the ICC could present as a catalyst in the community in terms of creating economic and social opportunities, not just for Indigenous peoples, but for all community members and folks within the region as well. Next slide, please. One of the main findings we had was about the importance of relationships. So not only the relationships between peoples, but importantly between organizations. The ICC is not seen to duplicate existing programs and services. It's to, if I could use the term, the amorphous gray blob that we talked about in the last few presentations on this project. It's to fill that space in between existing programs and services and better connect and reinforce them. It also emphasizes relationship between community members and from a geographic perspective, connecting people to land. Next slide, please. The outcome of that feasibility study presented three scenarios. The basic seen as meeting existing community needs, and the future-oriented meeting, as it suggests, the future needs of the community as opportunities continue to emerge. Next slide, please. The governance work that we did with the remaining budget from the feasibility study sought to have greater clarity around what a governance structure of this could look like. We identified the need for this to transition over time from being a project that's municipally led to a project that's led and owned by the Indigenous community. To facilitate that, we went through a process of engagement whereby we took Blackfoot cultural values and actually designed a governance structure around that value system to really connect it back to the community. Next slide, please. This is the governance model. It has a representation from different parties at the ICC table, including both youth and elders, tenants and operations folks who would be a party to an ICC, and at the core you see the values. That's the Blackfoot cultural values that guide how the governance structure comes together and the vision that it carries forward. Next slide, please. And in terms of strategic alignment, there's very strong alignment both to Council's strategic plan and the reconciliation implementation plan, but also it's a specific recommendation coming out of the MMIWG work plan that was approved by Council in January. Next slide, please. In terms of the scope of the project we're suggesting here, if this project were to be approved, we would actually begin some work the rest of this year to formalize the partner organizations, perhaps through letters of intent. We would complete the formalization of a governance structure in 2022, empower that governance structure to do some site selection work. And once a site has been chosen, complete a comprehensive site plan. The important thing to note on a project like this is a relationship between both outdoor space and indoor space. So a comprehensive site plan allows us to think about how those two can relate together. And then finally, complete the outdoor gathering place detailed design. The outdoor gathering place was seen as the highest community priority for this project, and so that's one of the reasons why we would choose to begin with more detailed design for that work. Also in terms of supporting the ability of a governance structure to take on a project of this scope and scale, the outdoor gathering place is kind of its first step, is seen as maybe a more sustainable path in terms of kind of taking over the operations of this, again, transitioning it from municipally led to community led. Next slide, please. For those who may not be familiar with what a comprehensive site plan is, I've provided an example from Sault Ste. Marie. This is just a sketch to show you that a comprehensive site plan considers the relationships between multiple buildings or facilities on a given site, outdoor spaces, indoor spaces, things like infrastructure, utilities, servicing requirements, parking, access, all of these things. Because again, this is conceptualized as not just a one building, but as a larger kind of perhaps a campus, if you can think of it in those terms. Next page, please. And from the perspective of an outdoor gathering place, again, we wanted to provide a few examples so we can kind of materially see what that might look like. There's a few examples provided on the screen. The center one focuses more as a kind of a powwow arbor gathering place. The one on the left is maybe more of a educational space, and the one on the right is kind of maybe a more contemplative gathering space. So we don't exactly know what it's going to look like. The design will be based on community engagement and led by the kind of the governance structure. But just to give some ideas of what it could take, what form it could take. Next slide, please. And the final slide just shows you the budget breakdown. We have been in conversations with a potential federal funder for aspects of this. So just to kind of give some idea, we've presented two options. One, which would be to fund the full ask, which is $350,000, and we would return grant dollars if successful, which we are aiming for in the region of about $100,000, or a second option, which would be to fund, provide a conditional approval of $250,000 and anticipating that federal grant. Happy to have questions about this. Would you like me to proceed to the next project or pause for questions?
Let's pause for questions here. Questions from council? Councillor Kaufman?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Stein, for the work in the presentation. I appreciate what you do. Am I to understand then by what you presented here, the cultural center would be outside of this 4-year time frame?
That is correct, as the project is presented right now.
Okay. If we were to come up with funding partners, would there be a plan B ready to go? And I don't know if that's for you or if that's for Ms. Pinkson.
I guess from a partnership perspective, I would say if we had partners come to the table who were interested in speeding up the project, I would be very happy to come back to council to amend the ask, but I can defer that other aspects of that to Haley.
Councillor Kaufman, I think it would be very similar to how the situation was handled in 2020 when some funding came forward and then options were brought forward to council in terms of project advancement or project proposals. So even though it's outside of the potentially outside of the 4-year window, council can always reconsider in projects on a regular basis to kind of move them ahead depending on opportunities that present themselves.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the reason I asked about the plan B then, and thank you both for that answer, is how far down we have this challenge with any facility we want to build. How far down the pipe do you get to design, or the actual things that you need to have ready in order to move to construction, without that information becoming dated in the future or premature. So just thank you. I think you've answered my question. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there are no further questions. The information was certainly helpful. We look forward to the next project.
Thank you. If I could just mention, just to follow up on Councillor Kaufman's question, the intention of the detailed design for the outdoor gathering place is to have a shovel-ready project at the end of that plan. Okay, the second project that's being presented, you can go to the third slide. Perfect, thank you. Is the Indigenous Placemaking Strategy. Placemaking is a concept that I think is becoming increasingly popular and is being referenced in different areas. So you probably recall from the Public Art Master Plan, your review of the Municipal Development Plan, and other conversations with different folks that this idea of placemaking seems to be a bit of a buzzword these days. It's an important concept. It's about bringing people together, creating strong linkages between people and the communities they live in, a better creating vibrancy in public buildings and public facilities. And so this project is coming to City Council for consideration to better reflect Blackfoot and other Indigenous peoples' culture into public spaces in the city. The two-part project in the same CIP cycle, the first one is to create a master plan. I use that term a little bit loosely, create a strategy to allow us to kind of identify opportunities to reflect Indigenous placemaking, and the second component to actually complete some of those opportunities. Next slide, please. Again, a review of placemaking. A few examples here. If anybody's flown through the Vancouver International Airport in the last few years, you'll recognize some of the middle image. On the right, we have the Chief Mountain border crossing on the American side that reflects Blackfoot traditional territory there. Again, placemaking is about better connecting people. We know from the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and the TRC that Indigenous peoples, particularly those living in urban areas, feeling dislocated from the areas they live. That's a result of their history being actively removed from landscapes and being replaced by settler history. This is an opportunity for us to better showcase Blackfoot cultural values and history within the urban area. Next slide, please. Placemaking or Indigenous placemaking is not necessarily something completely new. You know, it's coming out of this motion, specifically coming out of the 2019 Oki motion, where Oki became the official greeting of the city of Lethbridge, where the CIP project was asked to come back. It also is referenced in the MMIWG work plan. To date, we've had a few examples of Indigenous placemaking, the Oki Sign project, which was so successful in 2019, along the International Year of Indigenous Languages, an upcoming project to add new flagpole structures to City Hall, which I presented to Social and Cultural SPC last week, and projects in Watermark, at the Public Library, and at the Waste and Recycling Center all have aspects of Indigenous placemaking coming up. There's also in this community examples where perhaps we could say Indigenous placemaking has not been quite as successful. These are more historic examples where we have facilities and roads and places named after Indigenous peoples or nations that maybe we would reconsider if we were to do that again. So this is an opportunity for us to think about being meaningful, intentional in terms of reflecting cultural values. Next slide, please. Examples of what this funding what kind of projects it might lead to, land acknowledgements at major city entrances. When we were doing the ICC project, there was a lot of interest in having the Oki sign at each city entrance to kind of reflect where it is that Lethbridge exists. Art and interpretive information at the new city airport terminal, naming of facilities, parks, assets. We know that, for example, the city of Edmonton just renamed all of their wards with Indigenous names, murals, other forms of public art. A couple examples here of a mural from Fredericton and an Aboriginal interpretive trail from Fort McMurray. These are just examples of types of projects that we could see result from this. Next slide, please. In terms of strategic alignment, again, this aligns quite strongly with Council's strategic plan and the reconciliation plan, both in terms of better showcasing Indigenous peoples and their identity within public spaces, and again, from the MMIWG work plan, where this was a specific recommendation. Next slide, please. Two-part project, as I mentioned. The first piece is that kind of strategic or master planning component, which would take place in the first year, and then once opportunities have been identified, we would look to kind of advance those over the remaining 3 years of the cycle. The image on the right is from the traditional knowledge and use assessment that the city completed in 2016-2017, showcasing sites that we already know have significant Indigenous cultural interest and value. And those are in more natural areas. Those might be opportunities for us to kind of intervene and provide more interpretation and celebration of, as well as sites that are maybe more urban in nature. Next slide, please. The budget ask for this is $50,000 to do the strategic planning, and then $325,000 to do the actual implementation in design and construction. Thank you very much.
Questions from council? Any questions? Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Mr. Stein, for the presentation. Sorry, you closed down the budget sheet. Are there any alternate pots of funding for this? We talked a bit about art. I'm wondering, we had a good discussion on public art. Have you connected with the Public Art Committee? They've got some dollars as well. I'm just wondering if there's other sources of funding for some of this as well.
Part of the placemaking work, we are already working with the Public Art Committee. So the commemoration project, which will be released in the next couple weeks, follows a partnership between Public Art, the Reconciliation Committee, and the MMIWG work plan. So we are very interested in leveraging those relationships to make these dollars go as far as possible, and have already been doing that, and would continue to do that. So I think we could think about the implementation dollars on this project being very leverageable, either for grant opportunities or to enhance other folks' projects. So parks projects or transportation projects, facilities projects, where we can ensure that Indigenous peoples are meaningfully reflected in those public projects as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions from council? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stein, for the overview of those projects. We'll now move on to 4.3. Okay, all right. Sorry. We have a motion from Vice Chair Carlson. Indigenous Relations Office Capital Improvement Program project submissions. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receive the presentations as information. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman, and thank you, Mr. Stein, for the presentation and information and discussion. If there's no further questions or debate, I'll call for the vote.
Question has been called. All in favor? Any opposed? None. Thank you. Okay, now we'll move on to 4.3. And we invite Mr. Andrew Malcolm to present, Urban Revitalization Manager. Mr. Malcolm.
Thanks, Mayor Spearman. So good afternoon, members of Economic SPC. Next slide, please. So a little bit of context to the two projects that I will be presenting on. A strong urban core centered on its downtown is critical for a successful city and a region. For this reason, among others, it is imperative that we continue to support and enhance the core through consistent and purposeful revitalization efforts. While there are many projects that could be brought forward related to revitalization efforts, we have been mindful of the current economic reality and uncertainty on funding. And as such, we have tried to be as strategic and purposeful with what we are bringing forward as it relates to revitalization. To ensure the city continues to capitalize on private and public investment that we have seen over the past few years during admittedly challenging times, we feel it important to continue forward with our efforts in the urban core, and as such are bringing forward two capital-based projects for the 2022-2025 CIP. That being the Urban Core Public Realm Enhancement and the 5th Street Reconstruction Preliminary Design. We feel that these two projects align very strongly with the hierarchy of plans in place, including the Heart of Our City Master Plan, the Downtown Area Redevelopment Plan, and the Public Realm and Transportation Study, to name a few. Specifically, pulling on the upgrading of aging existing infrastructure and the encouragement of a more pedestrian and public realm. So the first project is the Urban Core Public Realm Enhancement Program. So this project would provide flexible funding for spot replacement, upgrading, and renewal of urban core public realm infrastructure. And I'll touch on the details a little later slide. The total cost of this project would be $2 million. Next slides, please. So in the previous CIP cycle in 2018 to 21, just over $1 million was approved as Downtown Public Realm Enhancement. D24 was the number. This was the first time that capital funding was approved specifically for the replacement of obsolete or worn public realm infrastructure. And this project would build off of the success that we've had over the past few years with this funding and establish an ongoing program with an expanded scope geographically. Again, this supports the implementation of a number of plans. Some of the deliverables that you may have noticed in the community through the previous cycle is park and ride public realm improvements, a post office public realm improvement which hasn't taken place yet, parklets and patios, streetlight banners, garbage can replacements which have started being implemented on the north side of Galt Gardens and will be throughout the downtown in the coming weeks. Planter replacements to replace planters that were actually formerly garbage cans in the 70s with new modern self-watering planters, and many other small improvements that often fall through the gaps of other funding commitments of other departments. Next slide, please. There's a host of benefits and connections to existing plans, largely around supporting economic growth, creating an attractive public realm, and creating opportunities for people to better enjoy the public realm, creating a strong and vibrant downtown and urban core. Next slide, please. Some of the details on how these project would roll out is in 3 key categories. One is the replacement or the refurbishment of our obsolete or worn out street infrastructure, which could include benches and outdoor seating, garbage receptacles, community lighting, street trees and tree grates, planters, and other items. The second category would be the filling in or topping up of gaps in other redevelopment-based public realm infrastructure projects, such as sidewalk renewals and laneway improvements. And the third piece, which we think is the most strategic and opportunistic, is being leveraged as an incentive to improve the public realm around adjacent private redevelopment opportunities. The way that we will be demonstrating this in the previous cycle is with the post office, where in correlation with their major $15 million private investment, we will be replacing the sidewalks, the street lights, and the bike racks around their project. Next slide, please. In the former program, the project and the spending was limited or bound to the downtown, which is the area in this map identified by the red line. The area that we would like to apply this project to would be expanded to extend to the urban core districts identified in the heart of our city master plan, which is in alignment with some previous decisions of council over the last few days. Next slide, please. So I will pause right there for any questions on project number 1.
So far, no questions. Council's interested in the information, but no questions.
All right, I will continue then.
Okay.
So the second project is the 5th Street Reconstruction Preliminary Design. So this project would be the completion of preliminary designs to reimagine 5th Street between 1st Avenue South and 6th Avenue South. This project would include geotechnical and environmental recommendations, existing condition assessment, and multimodal considerations, public realm improvement, and how it would connect with private redevelopment opportunities. It would include utility impacts, planning, construction, and estimated capital costs, ultimately getting us ready for a shovel-ready project in the future. The total cost of this project would be $1 million, and it would be following a similar process as 3rd Avenue. Next slide, please. So this project really builds off of the success and that momentum that we've established through 3rd Avenue, Reconstruction, and Festival Square Market Plaza projects in the creation of a backbone of the enhanced public realm. And the image I'll draw your attention to on this slide is from the Public Realm and Transportation Study. And this was the backbone for public realm in our revitalization efforts. The 3rd Avenue project is under construction as we speak. The Festival Square Plaza, which is identified just south of Galt Gardens, is currently in the final stages of detailed design and will be moving forward with construction this spring with funding from the municipal stimulus funding. And we believe that 5th Street is the next critical component of this. With major commercial corridor in our community, with 2 anchor tenants being Park Place and Lethbridge Center, as well as key land opportunities for coordinated private and public reinvestment. It supports a number of plans again. Next slide, please. There are a host of benefits and connections to existing plans to prepare the necessary work to have a shovel-ready project that will better position the city to secure future funding from other levels of government for construction. We want to focus on the improving and maintaining of existing infrastructure, support revitalization by supporting economic growth and development, creating an attractive public realm that will attract reinvestment, and re-envisioning the street for public safety and security, as well as public realm and vibrancy. Next slide, please. An image from the previous, the completed public realm and transportation study. And next slide. Open for questions as it relates to the first or second project.
Okay, Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Mr. Malcolm, for the presentation and description. Just because you mentioned it in a couple of these projects, Festival Square, what exactly is happening with Festival Square? I had some discussions earlier today with some folks who raised some concerns about what's happening there. Can you maybe give us an update?
Sure. So in the spring of 2020, we undertook a concept design process and with a lot of public engagement. And then the purpose of that exercise was to get us ready for a CIP ask in this cycle. And then in the fall of 2020, when the municipal stimulus funding came available from the province, it was vetted through that process and became a candidate, which was then supported. So in the past 2 months, we have completed some more engagement and are working on the completion of a detailed design, which we hope to go to tender with in the coming weeks, month, so that we can leverage this construction season along with a third avenue to complete the project by the required date of December 31st of this year.
Awesome. Is it possible to share any of that information with council? Just because I've been getting some questions from some business owners around there, so I'm assuming you're doing engagement or something. And so,
yeah, you bet. And Get Involved Lethbridge page, our downtown, has all the up-to-date information. So I'd be happy to share that link with you and all of council so that you can share and provide that to anyone who has questions.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And Mr. Malcolm, I don't know if this is to you or to the city manager or city treasurer, perhaps. And I meant to ask this for pretty much every project, so I'll do a more general question if I can. As we're getting out of COVID, knock on wood, a lot of our focus is around stimulus, economic stimulus, keeping people employed, working back to work. Is it possible for any of the projects that we're considering in a CIP to have that sort of embedded into I don't know what you call it, a stimulus lens, an economic or employment impact lens, so that when we're considering projects, we know which ones are really going to benefit the community in the short term, medium term, long term. That'd be very helpful to me if that's possible. I'm not sure who could answer that, or if it's something people want to take away and mull.
I would suggest we take it away and mull it, and think about how we might apply that lens to these projects. But certainly understand the intent. So if we could think on that for a bit and how we might do that.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you. But if it's only me, I don't want to put words in my colleague's mouth.
Okay. Any feedback from council? We'll move on.
I very much like what Councillor Carlson just said, but I think it's interesting how many lenses we're now throwing at everybody. Please look at it through a climate change lens. Look at it through an economic lens. We need to look at it through all those lenses, but at some point you guys are going to have so many lenses, you're going to have like 8 pairs of glasses. That's the only difficulty, right? And please, before any of that, look at it through a historic lens. Just kidding. I'm kidding.
Okay, Councillor Crowson, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Actually, I do agree with what Councillor Carlson was saying in a serious way as well, because I think that's the reason that we are looking at any of this downtown stuff. It's not just to do it, but it's to do it in a way that supports those businesses, those building owners, et cetera, that are down there. And so that ties into my question on the 5th Street reconstruction. So I know when the 5th Street and 3rd Avenue were first being considered, many people wanted 5th Street to go first, though 3rd Avenue was the one first chosen, because there's a lot of reason for 5th Street. If this does go forward at CIP, timeline? How fast would this project be done? How fast would you be to shovel ready if it works? Just sort of explain to me a bit more about where you're thinking on this. And if you'll actually make sure we get wider sidewalks instead of those narrow ones that don't let me do tours.
Yeah, so the thinking for this would be that this would be the preliminary design stage, which would take probably between 1.5 and 2 years to complete, just given the amount of different uses on 5th Street and the length of the corridor. And you are correct that at the point when these projects were coming forward through the public realm and transportation study, the 5th Street corridor was one that was preferred in terms of probably the greater overall impact. But 3rd Avenue would have been the first one we should dip our toe into this type of project on because of the amount of public frontage that was on that corridor with Galt Gardens, Casa, and a few other areas. And so at this point, we're learning through the 3rd Avenue project. So my hope would be when we are hopefully secure construction funding in the future for 5th Street, that we would be in a better position to kind of do that with as little impact as possible. Again, the hope here would be to 2 years from start, have plans in place that we would then be able to shop for other levels of or other levels of government funding, or potentially come back in with council to see if it was something that would want to move forward.
And have you talked to the BRZ and building owners? Is this something that's dreamed up just by the city, or is this supported by people along the street?
We haven't engaged specifically with the BRZ as it relates to bringing this CIP ask forward, but the Heart of Our City Master Plan, the Downtown Area Redevelopment Plan, and the Public Realm and Transportation Study all went through extensive public engagement over the last 10 years, and this is simply the implementation of it. Of course, if we received funding and moved forward, public engagement would be a very big component of the design work.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
You're welcome. Councillor Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to start off with maybe a comment first and then get to my question. So I've been on council quite a long time, and I can recall and I see that, every, I don't know how many years we, change flower baskets, change garbage containers, we try and do what we do to beautify downtown and make downtown a place for everybody to go. We seem to want to pave the streets in gold, but nobody goes there because of, I believe, some of the decisions that councils in the past and councils continue to make, that we actually speak out of both ends of our mouths, and we want to do what we can for downtown, but our votes and what we do basically moves everything away from downtown. So I don't know if this is the right time to ask this, but I have a question, because we seem to focus a lot on downtown, and I understand why, and we all get it. But we keep getting complaints about what's going on in downtown. So my question, these projects are great. When, and I've asked this every time and I will continue to do so, when will we shift our focus not away from downtown, but when will we start shifting some of our focus on doing these things that you've outlined here in this presentation to assist other areas from on 13th Street, from the railway tracks all the way to 9th Avenue, and from on 3rd Avenue all the way from 13th Street to Mary McGrath Drive? Why don't we ever consider spending money there and trying to do that? Because that, to me, is part of the link of downtown to the rest of our business community.
So Councillor Morrow, the 5th Street reconstruction is very specific to one street, and that falls into past planning that has been put in place. The Urban Core Public Realm Enhancement Project is in fact doing very much what you are requesting or suggesting. It is expanding what was previously constrained to downtown to a greater area, including 13th Street North, 3rd Avenue South, and the Warehouse District. So that is very much the intent of that, is to allow us to better support those other areas. And that falls into alignment with some decisions over the last few weeks as it relates to expanding the scope of the Heart of Our City Committee, so that we are able to have a committee that represents or can gain public feedback in those areas, so that we know when we're spending the capital dollars on those enhancements that is, in fact, aligning with those future contributions.
Thank you.
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Malcolm, for the update. Just wanted to kind of go back and think about the Third Avenue project, which was, you know, when you started off, there is some controversy that goes along with it. Some people are not happy about the, you know, narrowing the roads and all that. But I just want to, you know, because it had an impact on the businesses in that area. I just want to know what do you think you learned from the experience? And of course, COVID was happening at the same time too. But what did you learn from that experience? And how are we going to go to the 5th Street improvement and make that as you know, barrier free as it possibly can be? What are some of the big learning curves?
Well, we definitely learned a lot last year with the Third Avenue project, but again, we're only 1 block out of 4 completed, so there's still some learning to be done. But overall, the way that we engage with businesses on a regular basis, think we were able to mitigate or limit our impact considerably. There's no way a project of this scope could not impact businesses. It's a necessary work in many ways with the underground infrastructure, and then the putting back of the surface works in a better condition than what it was just makes a lot of sense. But yeah, we had very open lines of communication on this project, and as we go forward with the rest of the 3 blocks this spring and summer, I'm sure there will be more learning to be done. And again, more to apply on 5th Street, or all those learnings to apply. And I can't speak for all of the learnings because I'm not the project manager on it. I'm just trying to coordinate that experience with the businesses. And you know, minor complaints, but I think given the amount of work we were doing, I think it was fairly successful.
Great. Just maybe this isn't the right time to ask, but you know, talk of housing in the downtown core, like on a 5th Street or on a 3rd Avenue, is that's probably not part of the real plan at the moment. Is there a hope for more housing, like higher end housing in the downtown?
It's not maybe directly related, but I mean, the whole purpose of these types of projects is to create an environment where people want to spend more time. That's why we are focusing on the widening of the sidewalks and the creating of a more comfortable place for people to shop and spend time, in the hopes that when we achieve that, then people now maybe probably want to live and enjoy that environment a little bit more. None of this work is easy. It's very complex. The social issues, the infrastructure, all of these things are independent but very related, and so it's kind of how we mesh them all together.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. I think Mr. Hawkins wanted to add some comments. Mr. Hawkins?
Yeah, I just related to Councillor Morrow's question about those other corridors. In addition to the one project that Andrew presented this afternoon, I should just remind the committee that we are undertaking a preliminary and functional plan of the 3rd Avenue South corridor between Stafford Drive and Mayor McGrath Drive. That's an ongoing design project right now. And we are also doing the functional planning for the 13th Street corridor between 1st Avenue, the tracks all the way to 5th Avenue, and a portion of 5th Avenue as well. So there is design work being contemplated right now that was previously approved in the CIP, and the findings of that work will be presented to council as the work completes through Civic Works and obviously Economic SPC at some point as well. And it will inform council of future investments to do exactly in its own way some of the things that are in front of you today with respect to 5th. So it isn't that we are neglecting those areas. We are conscious that there are other business corridors, commercial corridors in this community that need our attention beyond just the downtown.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hawkins. I just have a follow-up question to actually approve a project. Does a lot of this work become obsolete and have to be redone, or or are these preliminary works and preliminary designs as we do them, are they a good investment that we can always build on?
I will likely defer to the details to Doug, but just in consideration of the Third Avenue project, the preliminary design to construction was about 9 years, and it was never redone. It was maybe edited or evolved slightly, but the base work was very much what was continued through. And Doug, please correct me or step in here.
No, Andrew's got it right. Preliminary design takes it to a level of detail that frankly does survive the test of time, even if there is a substantial delay between when it's completed and when you actually complete a detailed design and go to tender. So it is very seldom a wasted exercise or an obsolete exercise, or even if there is a delay before the major investment in construction occurs.
Okay, thank you for that answer, because I think that gives me some assurance that what we're looking at and what we could spend money on would be dollars well spent. Thank you. Are there any further questions from council? Okay, there are none. So we would move on after we pass a resolution. I have another resolution from Vice Chair Carlson. Urban Core Realm Enhancement and 5th Street Reconstruction Preliminary Design. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receive the presentation as information. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Again, thank you, Mr. Malcolm and Mr. Hawkins, for your explanations and information. If there's nothing further, I'll call for the vote.
Okay, question has been called. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. We're now on to 4.4, projects for transportation. And Mr. Darwin Jewell is the presenter, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. These are going to be 2 or 3 minutes per slide, so it's going to be fairly quick. If you can go to the next slide, please. This particular project, West Lethbridge Depot site, I'm going to give you a bit of history from 2012. These were all approved through the current capital improvement plans of the day. In 2012, we did, in the green area, developed a site. It was a new site, built a snow storage site there, and that's for transportation's use. In 2018 and 19, we did the salt storage shed, and now we have 2. This is our second, the west side. That was completed along with the site work, so it's now a fully paved site with street lighting. Everything is there except the storage building. And phase 3A, this was approved in the last CIP under D19, I believe it was, and it was split between 2021 and 2022 with utility capital funding, I believe. Even in late 2020, we RFP'd out. Our architect is designing right now as we speak. We've got FWD, Ferrari Westwood, doing the design, and by May or June we should have the concept design for 3A and 3B. And concept is the building and an admin building for future. So the 3A is just a building to house vehicles and storage. I should mention there is no services up in this quadrant of the city, and it's probably 10 or 20 years until we get services there. But we want to have a concept design that fit in when we're going to do a detailed design and construction of the building to hold 15 or 20 vehicles and storage in that blue area that you can see there. So this was approved in the previous CIP. It's just because it's a 2021 project, we wanted to reapprove. The budgets aren't changing, everything else is the same. So I think that is it for this project. I can stop for any questions if you have.
I think there's a dog barking somewhere, but
Sorry about that. That was my dog.
okay. Okay, questions. So some of this work will be 20 years away.
The building itself, the admin portion of the building, I'm going to call it phase 3B. They're doing a design for phase 3A and 3B. The admin portion of the building, where people would reside and work, would be 10 to 20 years out. But the occupied, where you're going to put vehicles and storage, that is design and construction this year. We're going to tender it, I believe, fall of this year. And so it will be tendered this fall, and they'll start construction this fall and go in about a year and a half.
Okay, and number 7.8 million.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carlson.
Thanks, Mayor Spearman. Thanks, Mr. Joel, for this. Just some clarity for me. This is previously approved. Is that correct?
Yes.
So maybe through you, your worship, to the city treasurer, we had an update on available funding. Would this be part of that, or is this what we approved 4 years ago?
Mayor Spearman, through to Councillor Carlson. This is not part of the available funding. This was part of the previous CIP. Typically, when projects straddle that 4-year window in terms of 2021 and 2022, they are included in the next CIP, just in terms of showing the history and the progression. So this is previously funded and is just showing up as a previously approved project.
Excellent. Thank you. Sorry, Darwin's dog set my dog off. It was a chain reaction. Excellent. Thank you.
Just turn this meeting over to the dogs. Yep. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Darwin, for the information. We are generally constructing the same things when we're doing these operations depots. Is there an efficiency in just having a design, working on any change in the design that's required in terms of who we have more equipment, less equipment, and just sort of operating on a standard design as opposed to constantly going out to tender and incurring additional costs on that?
Yeah, we have 2 valid master plans that are done. 2008 was the North Side Public Operations Master Plan, and this West Side Depot was a 2012 master plan. So we've been following those master plans, especially the West Side, quite meticulously over the last 3 CIP cycles.
Yeah, let me clarify. When you're looking at buildings, because I heard you, did you say you've tendered with Ferrari Westwood Babbitts?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess it's a question of, and certainly not to minimize the architectural significance of operation depots. However, to slightly minimize the significance of architectural beauty of operation depots, is there a reason why we are not using a standardized design in terms of the buildings? We'll have a generality in terms of what we need and our requirements, because each of the different depots, by my recollection, are generally the same. You have some landscape sizing differences, of course, that can be modified, but starting with a base plan.
Yeah.
And modifying from a base plan as opposed to a redesign on every depot, a redesign of the actual structures. That's the part I'm talking about.
Yeah, and this Ferrari Westwood is the architect, but they have an engineering firm that's doing the engineering design. It's not going to be a pretty building per se, like an architecturally designed building, aesthetically pleasing. It's a building that'll house about 20 vehicles, but we also wanted to have, this was RFP'd out to engineering consultants and architects. So Ferrari Westwood won the contest for a consultant to do a design and construction monitoring for this type of building. The reason it's important to get this done in 2021, 2022 is solid waste has vehicles right now that need to have storage in there, indoor storage. So we know the needs of a building, and it's going to be very simple as a building. The concept design that they're doing right now is for the administration in the building in the future. And the benefit of doing it now as a concept design, it's only a 20-30%. Then we'll have numbers so that we can submit for future capital improvement plans. Remember I said this area doesn't have services yet. It could be 10 years out. It could be 20 years out. We don't know how long it'll be out, but we do know that the public operations north site, that's the only other public operations, is getting very constrained right now. So this is our only other site to balance the vehicles, storage, employees, and it's really how we're accommodating growth in public operations north and public operations west.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hawkins, do you have an idea where?
Yeah, just to give you some confidence. This will be a very simple basic structure, in particular 3A, which is vehicle storage. It is typically a pre-engineered building, so it is very typical of industry standard and what you would see from operations depot to depot. Having said that, though, every site is unique, and that's where you still need an architect/engineering firm to come in and size the thing, do the site designs and stormwater management and those kinds of issues too. So it's more than just the building itself. But again, there was a competitive process based on a defined scope of work for a very standard structure, so that we wouldn't be overpaying for engineering or architectural services in this instance. So there's no avoiding that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's the clarity. I appreciate that. Thank you both. Thank you, Mayor Sturman.
Okay. Are there any further questions from council? Okay. I'll ask Mr. Jewell to continue, please.
Okay. Next slide, please. Now, Mr. Malcolm talked about the 5th Street preliminary design project. This is also this 3rd Avenue. To the west of Stafford is the 3rd Avenue reconstruction that's ongoing right now. This is really extending 3rd Avenue east of Stafford all the way to Mammograth Drive. And in D23, previously approved capital improvement plan, there was a $300,000 preliminary design. That is underway right now, and we've put that preliminary design on pause only because of the COVID pandemic, and we didn't want to upset or shock any of the other businesses along there relative to potential changes. And so that's an ongoing project right now for a preliminary design. This here is really now implementation of that preliminary design into a construction. So it could be 5 years out, 10 years out. It likely will hit hit the 10-year capital improvement window. It may not hit the 4-year funding window. But the key thing is this particular corridor, as well as some others like 5th Street, are in dire need of a revitalization. So if you walk back the history in 1980s, when Crow's Nest Corridor came in, 3rd Avenue was the main street, the only street to get from east-west on Highway 3. Since that time, all transportation has done is a couple of intersection improvements to do signals, to do overlays. There hasn't been, and a couple of sidewalks we've put in. We still now have sidewalks continuous through there, but there weren't in the past. So this is really upgrading that entire corridor from now Mammograth Drive to Stafford to make it a good corridor that people enjoy, not just driving on, walking on, cycling on. So it's really developing it for all modes of travel and really revitalizing the area. So we've proposed, on the next slide, please, The 4.5 million, this would likely this is in 2022 dollars. We actually think it should be in 2026 to 2030 in 2 phases, but that's up to City Council to decide where they want to place this project in the 10-year window. But we think that between Stafford and 13th Street is a good phase 1, and 13th Street to Mayor McGrath Drive is a good phase 2. And it's really working with the businesses along that corridor and the public with what options are they most excited about. The key thing is we want to widen the sidewalks, add some green space that there's literally no trees along that corridor, allow cycling to occur on that corridor or adjacent corridors, and basically revitalize all of the infrastructure. We're not going to be doing major underground work like 3rd Avenue between Stafford and Scenic, but we are doing minor upgrades relative to shallow utilities and street lighting and cosmetic work, trying to revitalize that area. So right now, this is the same number that you saw the previous CIP, 4.5 million, done in 2 phases, but we don't pick what year we're doing the work on this one here. So I'll leave it at that and entertain any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this issue was raised earlier by Councillor Morrow as one of his concerns. Are there any questions? So this is slated in 2022 dollars, but Mr. Jewell is saying more likely could be done in 2026 to 2030. Is that correct? Did I kept?
That is correct.
Questions from council? There are no questions from council.
I think Haley had something, and then I have something, Your Worship.
Okay, go ahead. Ms. Pinkson, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight, Mayor Spearman, that all of the projects are identified in 2022 dollars, and then as the plan begins to be built by City Council, those will shift out to the years proposed and adjusted accordingly. But everything at this point is presented in 2022 dollars.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Carlson?
Thanks, Mayor Spearman. Thanks, Mr. Jewell. I'm trying to recall 4 years ago, because I think this was in front of council in the CIP 4 years ago.
Yep.
We did the planning dollars at that time, a couple $100,000 if I recall. And this was slated in the next window. So yeah, that's why you're bringing it forward.
That's correct.
Thank you. Has the scope, I'm trying to recall, and I thought it was about half this cost or less.
No, I believe it was 300,000 D23. We could check that book, and it was 300,000 identified for a preliminary design, and we got underway on that late 2019-20. And because of the pandemic, we slowed that project, just put it on hold. But right now, we don't have any revised cost estimates. We have design concepts to show the public, but now we've put that on pause. Probably spring of 22, we will reactivate that project and finalize the cost estimates. But the cost estimates that were created were 2 phases, and I believe I picked 2022 and 2027 or 8 in the past. But because we thought 2022 is not appropriate to do another construction project, the design, preliminary design isn't even finished yet, we'll roll it ahead by 4 years. And so City Council can pick the years that they choose if they want to fund it, but at least now you have a reasonable funding source, and it'll only get more accurate when we finish this preliminary design. Just like Andrew Malcolm talked about the preliminary design on 5th Street, it's to allow enough design to happen so you get good numbers and a shovel-ready project, basically. So this project could be a perfect shovel-ready project if future grants come out.
Thank you. I think I recall now, I think it was split into 2 phases. And that's what I may be remembering, which is why I thought it was half the cost, but it was
Yeah.
probably half the cost, but twice. Okay, thank you.
And Ms. Pinkson, would you like to add some more information?
Yeah, I was just going to highlight it was 2.1 million in 2022 and 2.1 million in 2027.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's what I was in my brain. Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Mr. Jewell, it's not in here. It might be associated, though, a little bit with the Third Avenue project. Completion of D22 from last year. Council approved reconciliation. Man, I don't know about my colleagues. I'm a little tired today. A reconstruction, redevelopment, new development, whatever we want to call it, of Third Avenue from 4th Street to 8th Street. I don't believe that we completed the entirety of that for the $10 million. What's the status on that, and how does that tie into what's being proposed here?
The two are totally separate projects.
You know that? Yep.
D22 is totally on track financially, and we only planned on doing 1 to 2 blocks in the first year, and then the remainder part in 2021. The latest update I had from our project managers is they're supposed to start first week of April, first or second week of April, and our contractor will be going like gangbusters on 3rd Avenue Reconstruction, D22. This here, D23, is the 3rd Avenue beautification. All we had approval for was the preliminary design, that 300,000. So we've got our consultant. We started our public engagement and design concepts, but then we just put it on pause because of the pandemic and because we didn't want to go in right in the middle of a pandemic with all the changes.
Thank you for that. And I recognize 2 separate. Thank you for the update on D22. Appreciate that. The community will be happy to hear that. Is there anything then that could be done, maybe moving, and again, it's all dependent on funds, but if we're going to Stafford, you're going to have that very, it's like traveling east of Winnipeg. You hit the tree line. You'll go from a very nicely redesigned or redeveloped downtown into the barrens, into the wasteland. Is there anything that could be done extending from Stafford on the other side of Stafford as we're starting to work down 3rd Avenue?
Yeah, good question. I don't think that D22 reconstruction project will have funding, and the project limits right now don't even go to Stafford anyway. It goes to just east of 8th Street. And so there are actually 2 separate cutoffs. I don't even think we have to deal with Stafford Drive as a overlap because neither of the 2 projects will necessarily go into that intersection. One will go east and one will go west.
Okay, that's clarification. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions from council? Okay. Somewhere I have a resolution. Okay, if there's no further questions, we'll deal with the resolution. Again, from Councillor Vice Chair Carlson, CIP Section D, Projects for Transportation. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receive the presentation as information. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Again, thank you, Mr. Jewell, for the updates and information. And I'd ask for my colleagues' support and call for the vote.
Okay, question has been called. All in favor? Any opposed? There are none. Thank you. We'll now move on to 4.5 and see if Mr. Dave Ellis is available.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman and members of the Economic Standing Policy Committee. I'd like to set just a very brief context to our presentation today, and that is dealing with an unprecedented growth and use of our park system, particularly in last year. We don't specifically count people in parks, but our pathway system saw a 45% increase in use in 2020 over 2019. In discussions with my colleagues across the province and the country, we anticipate this use will will continue through 2021, and it will remain higher even when restrictions for other options are lifted. And we definitely feel a responsibility and a pressure towards meeting those customer service needs in the community. We have 6 budget initiatives to present today, plus one more that's been tacked on to our slide deck, which is a joint one. And these have been selected as our priorities for consideration in this budget cycle because of the realities of the current economic and social climate, fit within our management strategies, and alignment with both corporate and park strategic plans. And these alignments include ongoing cost savings and efficiencies, customer service, partnerships, preserving and protecting our current assets, environmental sustainability, and contributing to a livable, engaged, connected, and prosperous city. Next slide, please. The first one I would like to talk about, and I've got 6 to do in 10 minutes, so I apologize, I will be flying through these. The first one that I'd like to talk about is central control irrigation. This is a direct recommendation from the Energy Efficiency Master Plan, and I believe that master plan will be presented to committee next week. This initiative allows us to take advantage of some changes we're making in our central system right now. We're in the process of changing vendors to update and modernize our software, and this new software will allow better functionality, including operating remotely, enhanced management, compatibility with weather and environmental monitoring, for example, soil moisture probes. It has better data capture and allows for better reporting capabilities. Although we got off to a great start in the 1980s with centralized irrigation, we only have 67 of 280 sites on central system, and this initiative will allow us to increase that by 40 or 50, depending on the vendor we select. This initiative would improve cost efficiency and environmental sustainability. Next slide, please. The gulp number 6, mine interpretive park. This ask is to increase our typical cost share, which we make with developers in developing new city parks in Lethbridge. This has been in the planning and the design stage for over 10 years. In 2016, City Council designated this site as a municipal historic resource. It comes with a letter of support from the Lethbridge Historical Society. The project will essentially transform the ruins that are currently there into an interpretive park and tell the stories of the mine and the miners. As I mentioned, this is an increase in our typical cost share. Typically, our programs allow us to cost share for this size of park up to about $90,000, and it increases it to $1 million. And the reason for that ask is because in order to do this project correctly, it is going to take in excess of about $3 million. I do want to mention that there are operating costs associated with this initiative, but those operating costs are not contingent on the increased cost share. They're determined by the size of the park. This initiative aligns with creating good partnerships in the community. It will contribute to cultural diversity and historic preservation. Next slide, please. Asset management is a ongoing ask that we've had in place for the last 10 or 12 years. We have a diverse and a complex park system, and the value of our inventory, excluding buildings and bridges and trees, is just shy of $130 million. And keeping that in a usable, presentable, and functional condition requires ongoing life cycle of those assets. Generally, our replacements and our need to life cycle is not governed by age. It's governed more by use and abuse of our systems. 10 years ago when we started, we had a significant and in my opinion, a very serious backlog. And this ongoing program allows us to not slip back into that gap. This budget allows us to maintain at a lower cost because our inventory is more functional. It provides for increased safety. It allows us to keep up with innovations, and it keeps our assets functioning without limitations. And this initiative aligns with being a prosperous city with increased safety and with sound financial management principles. Next slide, please. Our parks, and if we can, Parks Master Plan. Our last Parks Master Plan was done in 2007 and has guided us well since then. Our park success is really measured by our understanding of the needs and the wants in the community, and then having the ability to deliver on those. First, we have to understand what is needed. A number of things have changed, obviously, since 2007. Conversations that we need to have include biodiversity conservation, environmental sustainability, and climate change. We've had more and more requests, and it's escalating for more off-leash parks for dogs. That requires a community conversation. It's not something we're comfortable doing ourselves, because introducing one activity, particularly off-leash dogs, will displace other activities that are in those parks. Our level of service, it's time to talk to the community about our levels of service, particularly in terms of provision. You know, a park can be anything from an old tractor tire in a pasture up to and including Disneyland or Bouchard Gardens. Well, what is it that the community really wants, and what can we afford? Those are the discussions we need to have, including the types of amenities. And so this doing a master plan isn't really so much a product, it's an opportunity that gives us a mechanism to engage and collaborate with the community. And this initiative aligns with being a well-planned city with good partnerships, economic management, and helps us align with public needs. Next slide, please. Our pathway system connections and extensions is another ongoing one. We've got a great pathway system, and as I mentioned, we saw use of the pathway system in 2020 increase 45% up over 2019. Our priorities for this budget cycle include a north to south connection on the east side of the city. This is a top priority for the running clubs in the city because it would allow them to facilitate marathons and other big events like that without closing or impacting so many intersections that currently limits their ability to do those races. This connection will also be needed when the Coaldale to Lethbridge Trail is completed. Another priority is the north-south route to go around the country club. This has been in discussion for years and years, and including last year when we engaged with stakeholders. This initiative aligns with partnerships and a well-planned city and environmental sustainability because these pathways are used for multiple uses, including alternative transportation. Next slide. It's for an outdoor sports court, and this is new, but it is requested and has been requested over the past recent years, and it's needed by at least 3 organized groups that currently are organized and trying to function, but they don't have a home base to grow their sports in. That includes roller hockey, lacrosse, and the Roller Derby Guild. This would be available for formal bookings to allow for games and formal practices, and it will also be open for drop-in play. It's essentially a pad with rink boards and lights, complemented by basketball hoops on the sides. This aligns with being innovative, meeting the needs in the community, and providing good customer service. And that's the 6 budget initiatives from Parks. And for the next one, I would like to introduce Mr. Chris Witkowski. He's our Parks Planning Manager, and he was a corporate lead on developing the master plan on mobility and accessibility. So, Chris, if you're there.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Mr. Mayor, I do see there are some questions in the queue. I don't know if you want to address those first, if you'd like me to do the project and then do questions afterwards.
Okay, councillors, do you want to ask your questions of Mr. Ellis? Councillor Carlson?
Either way, your worship, your call.
Okay, go ahead and ask your questions.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Councillor Carlson?
Oh, we're gonna go with questions for Mr. Ellis then?
Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Ellis. Appreciate again the presentation. Sorry, I closed my slide. I'm trying to open it again. On the first question I had, pardon me, the central irrigation control. Pardon me for 1 second. Thank you.
it talks about efficiencies, et cetera, but it also then increases operating costs. Can you maybe help me with that? I always hope when I hear efficiencies that it'll be a negative number in the operating costs. I was hoping that being central and people not having to go running around, et cetera, we'd see some dollars saved, but it doesn't seem to be.
Actually, I suspect there will be dollars saved. The difference is that the efficiencies will be achieved in the water treatment plant, particularly for the amount of water they have to treat. The moderate operating cost increase for Parks budget is to allow for communication. So these systems will use data cards or cell phone service and data cards to help us communicate. Our current system will use radios, which aren't as reliable, but so it allows us to increase those communication costs.
Thank you for that. With the Galt Mine Interpretive Park, it's quite a jump from the 90,000 to the million. But to help me, if the city didn't partner and didn't come up with the $1 million, what would happen with this? Because I know Melcor presented to council on this.
Yeah.
So what would happen if we said, yeah, we've only got the 90 grand?
Yeah. Well, because of economic constraints, my suspicion is Melcor would choose to cut back on the development, and they would finish the park and we would be maintaining it. And unfortunately, what would be lost is the ability of that park, that interpretive park, to really tell the stories. It would be, it would look unfinished and probably look like we need to complete it for years to come. So it would really diminish the effectiveness of that interpretive park. And the costs for developing this are substantially higher than a normal park would be, simply because they've got so much work to do to make it safe for the public to be there, and to create those stories so that they're understandable and celebrate that part of history for the city.
Thank you for that. And final question, if I can, Your Worship, probably to the city manager or treasurer. Parks asset management. It always shocks me when things like this are in the capital budget, and perhaps give me some comfort. Should we not be life cycling these into the operating budget, so that if we don't have the dollars in our capital budget, they're in our operating, or do we already do some of that?
Mayor Spearman through to Councillor Carlson. Yes, ideally we would have all of our life cycling in our operating budget. And we've been trying to kind of transition to move to that for many years, just related to, you know, other departments and facility services, for example. But it really just comes down to kind of tax impact in terms of ongoing operating costs and how we kind of transition. And so this is kind of the interim step as we try to manage tax rate increases and available funding and all of those challenges that come into play with all of the budgets. So.
Okay, thank you. Understood.
Acting Mayor Higgin.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. A question I have is one of the last slides that you put up there, Mr. Ellis, was the outdoor sports court. And I know there's been a lot of discussion in the community about these outdoor rinks during wintertime. You didn't speak to that, and I don't know if that's something that's even been looked into for that particular project. But second part of that question is, I understand that everything is coming with an operating amount. And I guess, well, maybe I'll have you answer that first question first, because I do have a question for Ms. Pinkston after as well.
Sure. This is an outdoor sports court, and specifically, although it might look like a rink and it would be similar because of the roller hockey, it's specifically not an ice surface. The surface here is a sport court surface, which is more suitable for rollerblades and those roller facility or roller equipment. So it's more of a summer play. We have looked very seriously, and we have again this year because of calls for them as outdoor ice. You know, this year we were able to open one of our ice surfaces for 2 weeks, and then it warmed up, it disappeared.
And that's understandable, but I'm just I'm thinking that this is a summer court. So for a 2-4, if you could, could we not look at the possibility, if it's 2 weeks, if it's 3 weeks, if it's 1 week of flooding this? Is there a way that we're trying to get everything into having one expense and being multi-purpose, as you indicated, a multi-purpose outdoor court? Could we not use it for other things? Or is that definitely just off?
We could look at it. It would require us removing the surface and just putting the ice on either asphalt or cement, and removing the roller blade surface so that it's not damaged by the ice. But we could look at that.
Okay, it's a very different surface then. Okay, and next question is for Ms. Pinkston, if I could. Do we have a way? And I'm sure I've only been through this. I guess this would be the third time, but I can't recall if when we had the capital budget, we're going through the CIP. Is there a running total on what operating costs are and how that's going to affect future taxation? Because I'm just wondering here, we're having all of these things come in and we're voting, yeah, we love these things. And then all of a sudden it comes to the cost to operate. Then we're like, ooh, I didn't realize that. Now they are showing in there, of course, but it'd be nice to have something running saying, you know, this is going to affect you in the future by this much with the decision of a capital. Here's what the operating is going to do.
Mayor Spearman through to Councillor Higgin. Yeah, we did. We tracked it last time. We had a summary in terms of available funding and then a summary in terms of operating impact. And then we also summarize it in the document. So we track it as projects are approved and demonstrate the impact in terms of tax rate increases.
Thank you. Maybe some brain fog, and I'm sure now you're mentioning that I do recall something along that line, but I think that's important because it's, of course, it's going to show us that, you know, if you're deciding to do this capital project, here's what it's going to cost for taxation on a regular annual basis. So thank you very much for that. Yeah. And thank you, Mr. Ellis. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Ellis, thanks for the presentation. I just, forgive me if you said it, with regards to the outdoor sports court, is there a preferred location for that? Has it been identified, or has it not?
It has been identified, and finding park space, believe it or not, we've got lots of park space, but finding space for these kind of things is a challenge. But we have found a place just up behind the North Fire Hall, north of 5th Avenue.
Okay.
On 20, yeah.
And of course, being Lethbridge, is there consideration for, you know, this wind that we get on occasion, or does that not enter into it? Or is there any way to, I mean, I know that, like, for example, the pickleball people are on the north side are concerned about the amount of wind that they get there, but does this matter for this situation?
We're currently working with the pickleball folks to come up with a solution for them.
Oh, great. Great.
The wind won't affect these sports quite as much because the pucks and the balls are on the ice surface, and there will be boards. Also in that location, just across the street, it's a mature urban forest there, so wind shouldn't impact this location quite as bad as it does pickleball.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. And I'm happy for the pickleball people. Great, thanks.
Councillor Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to dig a little deeper to what Councillor Carlson brought up, because the one slide, capital improvement program parks asset management, caught my attention very quickly. So maybe just let me make sure that I'm understanding. We are talking CIP, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so when I look at parks asset management, that particular slide, it shows a cost of $650,000 per year, yet net increase to operating cost shows zero. Well, in my mind, when something occurs year after year after year, and this seems to be maintaining, you know, pathways, furniture, roads, as it states there, I'd just like to dig deeper and get a better explanation as to why this is not in the operating budget. It shows up in capital. I heard Ms. Pinkston's answer, but I don't know if I quite understood, because I'm struggling with that.
So I suspect this ended up, and it continues to be in the CIP program, because 10 or 15 years ago, I think in 2008 or 9, whenever that budget cycle began, we were short several $1 million in backlog. And so in order to catch up, we asked and were given $1 million a year. And that emphasis started with playgrounds. The reason there's no associated operating dollars with that is it actually helps us be more efficient. So when we replace those old wooden playgrounds, our operating costs with associated with the newer, more upgraded playgrounds didn't increase at all. So we weren't adding inventory, we were simply replacing existing inventory that already had operating dollars associated with it. Since we've addressed that major backlog, this has been a standing item in the CIP. The amounts have been reduced significantly because we've been able to address that backlog that we initially had. And now this is just more maintenance. We do have a small component for asset management or life cycle in the operating budget. And I'll remind members of the committee that that was reduced last October.
Okay, I totally understand that. What I need to understand and what I'm missing, because I see us right now taking something that should be in operating and we're putting it into maintenance. And if we're doing it for park asset management, and I totally understand that if we put something in the CIP rather than operating, that will help our taxes and that'll help keep our taxes lower. So the point and what I'm trying to understand is we could be doing this for a lot of stuff. We could be moving a lot of our operating costs into capital costs. I'm old school and I remember that that was something that we shouldn't do. So can somebody please explain to me, because I'm still not getting it, the theory, the logic of putting this into, putting in my mind what is operating into a capital project.
Mr. Hawkins?
I'll take a stab at this. This is all about the funding source, because Councillor Morrow, you're correct. These are annual expenses, and annualized expenses are typically operating or show up in our operating budgets. However, in this instance, this program, because of the backlog, as Mr. Ellis described, 10 or 11 years ago was so significant, we dedicated a sizable grant towards resolving over those initial years the backlog. And we have continued to fund this program from a grant source. Haley can tell you what the exact split is, but it has, for the most part, been MSI for the 10 or so years that this particular program has been in existence. It compares a lot to if you look at the transportation, the C-section projects, we have a number of annualized programs there and in the CIP for the exact same reason. Not because they're not operational in nature, but because they're funded from grants. And we typically show the grant funded program in the capital improvement program. That's the long and short of this. The alternative to our current way to deal with this and those other annualized programs that are grant funding is to find a different ongoing source of funding, either, and in this case, the only other source of funding is taxation, and then free up those grant dollars for more traditional one-time capital expenses. But that, of course, comes with a tax pressure.
So after listening to that, what I'm hearing you say is that we're funding this because we had a backlog, and I'm okay with that. And I'm okay even taking it out of the operating budget. But once that backlog has been met, then I would hope that we no longer continue to do that. So I understand that, but you've raised an issue now that raises a concern, at least for me. You said that this is funded from grants. So normally, operating costs, which we have to do and maintain and do things year after year after year, ongoing forever, come from operating. If this comes from grants, if those grants dry up or no longer are there, now what? where's that money going to come to continue to maintain something that is ongoing year after year after year?
Yeah, I'll just take the first crack at that, Haley, and then pass it to you. You got a couple options. Yeah, if those grants disappear, you have to, in order to maintain the current levels of service, and in this instance, that's $650,000 a year in expense, you would have to find a different revenue source, which would typically be, in this instance, increased taxation. That's what you'd have to do, and you'd look to the operating budget to actually fund this. Or alternatively, you lower the level of service, you defer maintenance, you try to reduce this expense in some other fashion, and ultimately you'll end up with a backlog down the road again. So there are options available to you. None of them are pretty though. But you're right, we are exposed because we have, over the past 10 years or more, relied on a steady influx of provincial grant money in order to fund this program and to maintain these assets. Haley?
Haley, do you want to add to that, or I'm satisfied with the explanation? I understand, but if you want to add, please.
No, I think that that Doug has covered it all. I wouldn't necessarily add anything to that. The more we could transfer to the operating budget would be ideal, but again, it just comes down to funding and availability and the opportunities to do that.
Okay, but at some point, then wouldn't it be best for council, whether it's this council or future councils, to just bite the bullet and know that if we have something ongoing year after year, that it is part of the operating budget, especially if our community and all the surveys that we do tell us that they want us to maintain, levels of service and maintain our paths, and so that's kind of what I'm thinking. At some point, I think a council needs to deal with it. So why wouldn't we try and deal with it now rather than pass it on to later?
Absolutely, Councillor Morrow. It just is just given what the current economic conditions that we're in and the budget reduction exercises, there hasn't been that opportunity yet, but it's certainly, it would make sense for annual programs. I mean, there is instances where things come up, and you'll see it in facility services where the available life cycling funding is not sufficient to cover some major project, whatever that might be. And so you're always going to see, some projects in both budgets, depending on the size of them and just the availability of funding. And that's just kind of the challenge that we are faced.
Thank you both.
Okay, thank you. And just for clarification, Ms. Pinkson, what portion of the MSI does this come from? Is it operating or capital? You're on mute. I'm not sure if that's intentional.
Sorry, how many times do you get to hear that? Sorry, Mayor Spearman. So anything in the capital budget would be from MSI Capital. Because that program was ending in 2021, the funding source was transitioned to pay-as-you-go community starting in 2022. But yeah, in the past, it's been funded from MSI Capital.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from council? Okay, I see none. Perhaps we can move on to 4. It's the mobility accessibility audits. And the presenter is Chris Witkowski.
Chris Witkowski, yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the Economic SPC. As Mr. Ellis mentioned, this is not solely a parks project. If you go, yeah, there you go, please. Thank you on the slides. This is not just solely a parks project. This is a corporate initiative that's coming out of the Internal Mobility Accessibility Working Group. In 2020, as you might recall, the Mobility Accessibility Master Plan was completed, presented to Council, and accepted by Council in July of last year. Within that master plan, there are several recommendations, and one of the short-term key focus areas is the condition assessments of existing infrastructure or accessibility audits. So this project is teaming with parks, transportation, transit, and the planning department, planning in the way of looking at the interface between private, commercial businesses and public property. So between those 4 business units, looking at existing infrastructure, the project will establish criteria and do a field assessment of existing infrastructure compared to current mobility accessibility standards and universal design principles. Some of the major benefits out of this project, once we have a report established, I should mention we will bring in an outside vendor to help us establish this criteria and to do the field assessments. There will also be a final report that will come out of this. And through that report, we will then be able to best determine where we can put our future improvement resources. We can prioritize upcoming improvements, projects. This will also help us establish some baseline data for future performance measurements as we start looking at standard changes, looking at field improvements. And then finally, this will also help us continue our dialogue with the community members with lived experience who we've been speaking with. The goal here would be to bring a group of those members into this project to help us establish that criteria and to go over some of the final reports. And then that will, again, help us kind of dictate or be able to prioritize where our future improvements and resources are allocated. Just to note, this project is for the study only. It does not include any actual on-the-ground improvements. Those would come through future projects or future funding. I will keep it as brief as that and open it up to any questions.
Okay, questions from council? We're happy to see that this work continues. Councillor Carlson?
Thanks, Mayor Spearman. Just through to the city manager or designate. I know that our admin is very good at searching out grants wherever possible. Traditionally, it's the big ones. I know with a lot of these types of smaller planning type projects, there are sometimes grants available. We chase all grants, great and small, do we not?
Mayor Spearman through to, oh.
I was just going to say yes.
Excellent. Good. That's all I wanted to hear. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Witowski, as well.
I can also add to that there are several accessibility grants that are out there. There's the Federal Enabling Accessibility Grant. There's the Hansen Foundation grant. But those grants are right now only applicable to physical improvements. They don't apply to studies like this. So we have been searching for opportunities, but right now those are just on the physical improvement side.
Okay, I'd heard of a couple of those, and that's what I was wondering. So thank you for that clarity. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Witkowski. With that, we'll move on with the resolution from Councillor or Vice Chair Carlson. 2022 to 2031 Parks Capital Improvement Program. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receive the presentation as information.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Thank you, Mr. Witowski, for the updates and information. Unless my colleagues have anything further, I'll call for the vote.
Okay, there are no further questions. All in favor? Any opposed? There are none. Thank you. Okay, 4.6. KPMG Operational Review, RELD. Who will be speaking on this? Mr. Kelly?
Yes, I'm here, Mayor Spearman.
Thank you.
We've got the presentation and then the draft policy available.
Okay. Please proceed.
We can skip to the next slide, please. As part of the KPMG operational review, they identified 5 opportunity areas for the RELD or Lethbridge land area. Today, what I'd like to focus in on is the joint venture opportunity. Slide. Next slide, please. What the traditionally a joint venture is, I think a lot of people think about is about a joint venture in a land development area, and that's where 2 or more groups get together and cooperate to achieve a common outcome. And traditionally, we've seen greenfield, some redevelopment, revitalization, and I'll use greenfield. Opportunity was in Copperwood. We did a joint venture with a private investor. Also, Ridgewood was a joint venture that the city did with a private investor. Redevelopment, revitalization, probably the best one that I can give you as an example is the relocation of the CP rail yards where now Park Place Mall is located. And that was a joint venture between the province and the city of Lethbridge, and which ended in a result of a partnership with a private mall developer that now you see Park Place Mall. And then there's other things like affordable and social housing, and I go back to 10 years ago in 2009, 10, and 11, where the province allocated block funding to the city of Lethbridge, and then we went out and found partners locally to turn $12 million into $46 million worth of investment and over 600 different units throughout the city of Lethbridge. Now, why joint ventures? Why should we participate? The examples that I've just listed is that they give us opportunity, either for economic benefit, social benefit. There's often innovation and value added that can be derived from them, shared risk, and guaranteed short and long-term cash flow for the city are just a few examples. I think we just skip to the next slide. And this is just the timeline that was proposed in the KPMG report, looking for us to bring forward this type of information for City Council in 2021 and 2022. We're moving ahead because we think it's quickly, because we think it's very important that we hang out a shingle, the City of Lethbridge, that we're open for business. And I think this is a really good message for both the private sector and nonprofits that the city is, the door is open and we're willing to entertain opportunities. So if we can skip to the policy. So I just want to, now there should be a draft policy, please.
Is it on the screen, Michael?
It's not.
Not at the moment.
We do all have it in our packages.
Do you have it in your package?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, thank you. What I want to point out, and I just emailed it to the city clerk just in case, a Word copy of it. What I want to point out is the policy statement itself. Where I derive the information from to create the criteria and procedures, and even the policy statement itself is I researched and heavily relied on the information that the province of Alberta uses for P3 partnerships. Even though in the presentation, earlier in the presentation, I talked about it for joint ventures being for land development, I specifically wrote the policy statement that it could be more than just land development. It could take a look at other opportunities. from operating pools and rinks to the traditional land development components or some housing project. So I really wanted to make it clear is that the joint venture opportunities with private sector or nonprofit organizations, that they add value to the community that we're trying to build. And the procedures, again, where I derive these ones out of, and they seem to be applicable for our needs, were from the P3 documentation that the province of Alberta has. And as far as I'm not going to go through them each. I'll leave that for questions for afterwards, but I'd like to skip down to roles and responsibilities. I want to make it very clear that City Council is the approval authority of a joint venture. And will provide direction to the city manager or designate, and the city manager or designate is responsible for collecting all the applicable information and making that available, digesting it, identifying risk, and presenting it to City Council so they can give good direction and make informed decisions. And with that, I'd like to open it up to questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kelly. When you talk about projects, and I'm going to the policy statement, we'll consider joint venture opportunities with the private sector or non-profit organizations that add value and contribute to the building of community. So I'm just wondering, are we going to, we had an earlier discussion about lenses. Are we going to look at this through a business lens as well? Would there be a return to a financial return to the city, or would we be simply investing in something that has a financial return to a private partner, but has a community value only to the city of Lethbridge?
Well, it can be a combination of things, Mr. Mayor, of that it can be an economic win, it can be a community value win, it can be an environmental win. As previous discussions in your earlier, there's lots of lenses to look through, and for each opportunity, as the information is presented to council, they will have to weigh the balance of which one is important for that particular circumstance.
Okay, so there could be, is there any way that we could maybe enhance this policy by describing what the benefits might be?
Yes, I can. I'm quite willing to take that away and add those components, and if that's the will of council.
Of the whole council.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, the committee. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thanks, Mr. Kelly. I had a question on the policy statement as well. You said you pulled it from different places, or can you explain that again?
Well, the policy as a whole, where I scoured the internet, but where I really focused in was there was some really good material that the Alberta government had in relation to P3, and that's where I derived this information from. I thought it was quite solid information, and it would be applicable to any things that we'd look at as far as a joint venture. And to me, a joint venture could also include a P3.
Okay, and thank you. I guess it's the word to the building of the community. I struggled with that language, and I have no recommendations, but things like improvement or I don't even know what I would suggest, but the building of the community, I don't know what to suggest, but I struggled with that language. Thank you.
So, Mr. Kelly, we talked about a project where off-site levies might be an impediment, and the city might enter into a joint venture as the landowner where that may not apply, and a private operator could operate a project. Is that the type of thing that might benefit from a joint venture?
Well, it's it's not or never that. It's not that the offsite levy wouldn't apply. It's about how the development actually occurs. And the joint venture might be, we might do the development, but we might, the partnership might be that someone else is the operator. So it's not I don't want to focus on the traditional land development component. There's other opportunities for joint ventures or partnerships. And as I'm saying, talking to you about that, is maybe the term joint ventures is the wrong term. Maybe it's about partnership opportunities.
Okay, I'm just exploring and asking questions. I'm not judging the title at the moment. So, Councillor Croson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for this. It's certainly a good thing to be considering, because we can do a lot more in partnership or in joint ventures than we can ourselves. And again, because this is an SPC, it's much more about a discussion than a decision. When you have joint ventures will be evaluated, I don't know how my colleagues feel, but I would be more comfortable with may be evaluated, because there might be things that are in a certain situation that we haven't considered when we wrote this. And while it's nice to have guidelines and going, have you considered these things? They may not fit at that time, etc. So I always like to give future councils a bit of a wiggle room, even in a policy. So it's for my appreciation, I would have maybe instead of will be, because as people have said, some might be for financial reasons, some might be to get the benefit to the community, some might be for various reasons. So I just think to open it up a bit more, I'd love to hear what my colleagues think about that.
Thank you. It's a new idea, well worth exploring. What do other members of council think? More input? I see none. I think council would like to think about this further, but I think it's an idea certainly worth considering. Any further feedback from council?
Carlson here.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman, through you to probably the city manager or designate, Mr. Kelly. What was the thought behind this? I thought I heard Mr. Kelly say we want to get out with this speedily. That may not have been your words, but is it for something for council to mull and a member of council may bring it forward? Or is it something that administration would like to bring forward, run up the flagpole and see if council salutes at a meeting, and this was just to get some feedback?
Yeah, I'll take a quick shot and then turn it over to Michael. So this was a KPMG recommendation, which essentially said that the city could do more and should explore more joint venture opportunities as it looks to generate economic activity and revenue. And so these are the types of things, as Michael mentioned at the outset, that the city has done before. It was just codifying this as a tool in our toolbox, a tool in our economic development toolbox. So really, we just want to get this on the books, and Michael and his team and will continue to think about joint ventures as we move forward. And what I would recommend is that we take into account the comments that have been made today, and come back with that better definition and maybe a little more meat on the bone, if you will, to describe what we mean by joint ventures, and then seek council's sort of hopefully buy-in at the time. So that's where this came from, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. So, Mr. Dalton, the recommendation is to not recommend this to City Council today, but to just mull it again and come back to economic again, or go straight to council when it's been mulled?
Yeah, we could go straight to council. I think just based on the conversation that I've heard, we probably need to do a little more, because it is a bit nebulous, and we wrestled with that. And even KPMG's recommendation didn't go into tremendous detail. So I think we could take what we've heard today, rework this, and then hopefully bring it to council.
Excellent. Thank you, because I do agree that it's not earth-shattering new, but it's codifying what has been done in the past. So I'd rather see it sooner than later. So thank you.
Thank you. Acting Mayor Hagan.
Actually, no, I put my hand down there. Sorry, I thought I have an in-camera question, so I will not ask it here. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay. With that, if there's no further questions from council, I have a resolution from Vice Chair Carlson. RELD Joint Venture Policy. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee recommend that council adopt the joint venture policy as provided in attachment 2. So
thank you. I think we're going to change that, Mayor Spearman. I think council did provide some input that Mr. Kelly and Mr. Dalton have heard, and we'll be bringing something else forward. So right now, I'd just like to accept it as information.
Okay, recommend that council adopt, or this committee adopt the joint venture policy as information.
We can accept as information, and I trust that Mr. Kelly and Mr. Dalton heard the direction that take away what they've heard today and bring something for council's consideration sooner rather than later.
Okay. Thank you. Any feedback from council? I see none. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to 4.7, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've asked, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Malcolm to lead the conversation today. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Malcolm.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you, members of Economic SPC. So, as mentioned yesterday, back on November 2nd, City Council approved a series of 6 newer improved development-based incentive programs to support investors as well as business owners and their employees. The list of those programs was the Real Estate Sales and Leases, Affordable Social Housing Grant, Urban Core Housing Program, Targeted Redevelopment Incentive, the Urban Core Property Improvement, and the Industrial Municipal Tax Program. And when those were approved, we made the commitment that we would come back before March 31st and provide an update on how those programs were going. And so that's why we are here today. This short 4-page report indicates a few of the highlights, tracks our inquiries, and provides an update on where each of those programs is at. Some general highlights that we'd like to share on is that we've had generally very high and consistent interest in our programs since the approval on November 2nd. And we've actually been approached by 5 other municipalities in Alberta for additional information on those programs, and have had phone call or Skype meetings with many of them as they look to replicate, copy paste our programs as they see it as something useful to go forward with. Just some ideas here or some information here on our inquiries. As of March 8th, when this report was put together, we had 51 inquiries across the board on these incentives, with the highest amount of interest in the Urban Core Property Improvement Program. So at the bottom of this page, a little bit of information on the real estate and sales and leases. 4 inquiries, no applications. Continue to scroll to this page 2. the Affordable Social Housing Incentive, we've had a number of conversations regarding this grant. At this time, only one has been approved, and that was $146,000 towards 64 units of seniors housing, and the proponent or the applicant was Lethbridge Housing Authority. CC52, or the Urban Core Housing Incentive, we've had 2 inquiries, but at this point no applications, and has probably been the one with the least uptake so far. CC53, or the Targeted Redevelopment Incentive Program, as captured here, indicates 3 pending applications. Of course, those were approved at yesterday's council meeting. So as of today, we are sitting with 4 approved applications for the TRIP program. On page 3, the CC61, or the Urban Core Property Improvement Program. Just scroll a little bit more. This has been definitely the program with the most interest and uptake, which is exciting for my specific line of work. We've had 27 inquiries, which has resulted in 18 applications as of that March 8th date, which has resulted in significant investment. The grant funding committed as of that date was just under $400,000, which would have directly resulted in approximately $7 million of construction project or private construction projects. Since the date that we submitted this report, I've actually been in receipt of 13 additional applications, and now we are all but out of money in this program. So I'll come back to that point. And finally, CC64, the Industrial Municipal Tax Incentive, 5 inquiries to date, and no applications. And so just to go back to the conversation from yesterday as it related to TRIP program and some reallocation of funds, as well as that Urban Core Property Improvement Program, is we're currently at a point where we would like to have a conversation around whether or not we put a bow on these programs and suggest that they have been incredibly successful, and we stop taking in applications, or we look to redistribute some of the money to where the highest demand is, and the third is potentially facilitate even more funding from council to support these programs. So I'm happy to answer any questions, as I'm sure Michael will be as well, as to where we're currently at with this suite of incentives.
Okay, questions from council? Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thanks, Mr. Malcolm, for this. It's sometimes good, sometimes bad to be a victim of your own success. You talked about reallocating money. How many dollars would be there to be reallocated? I'm guessing, again, from UCHIP or whatever other ones.
Yeah, the money, our thinking at least, is that the affordable and social housing pot should remain independent and not be reallocated to other commercial or private investments, but that within the urban core programs, the housing, the TRIP, and the property improvement grant, that we could consider that one pot of money. And as of right now, we would have my rough calculations. I haven't gone through all the applications that I've recently been in receipt of. We would likely have enough money to support those 13 applications, but I haven't been able to go through those with a great fine-tooth comb yet.
Okay, thank you. And maybe through you to city manager or city treasurer, I guess, what are our other options? Would this be tax funded? Is it one-time MRSR funded? I'm trying to remember.
I defer to Haley on that.
Mayor Spearman through to Councillor Carlson. I think, well, originally Council approved $1 million from the MRSR. I think that probably, if Council wants to support additional funding, I think Andrew, we need to go away and kind of see what the dollar impact will be, depending on if their grant stream or tax stream will depend on how much money is required. But I think until kind of the economy starts to turn around, potentially Council could approve some additional one-time money from the MRSR to carry on the program if that's what they so desire.
Okay, Thank you. And final question on that same topic. Mr. Malcolm, you said, or just put a bow on it. What would that mean?
Well, I mean, if there's no more funding to allocate, there's no more applications to take in, and we simply say we've met our goal of distributing the funds provided. We've achieved, can't remember the number off the top of my head now, 7 million in stimulated investment in existing buildings, and we simply don't accept any more applications.
Okay.
Which would be, it sounds like we're ending it maybe prematurely, but I think that would be its success in itself.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Thank you. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Mr. Malcolm. As we had chatted yesterday, your recommendation then is to roll CC 52 into 61.
Yeah, the idea would, or the opportunity might be to have CC 52, CC 53, and CC 61 all pull from the same pot as applications come in, as opposed to having a separate pot for each.
Okay, so separate policies, one pot. Okay. Under CC 53, it said 4 inquiries, but only 3 applications. There's nobody in the hopper for that one right at the moment?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And how much is in CC 52, or how much is available for CC 52? If a ballpark is fine.
Yeah, we're about 85,000, but as I mentioned, I have 13 applications where I haven't gone through, and the part of it is they'll typically identify a dollar amount, but I have to go through and make sure that all the items that they're requesting is eligible. So typically that number comes down.
Sorry, CC 52 is what I was wondering. How much is in there? That's the urban core housing incentive.
Sorry, that one, as of yesterday's allocation to TRIP, there is just over 380,000 left, I believe.
Okay, thank you. I know we don't have any data on this, and there were far too many variables, unfortunately, to know exactly what the motivator was. What is your sense, given what's in the downtown, given what's out there in terms of inventory, that establishing an ongoing program like this will actually have some sort of uptake, but more importantly, a benefit to the community? Because if we're taking money out of play, that's money that we're not spending somewhere else.
Yeah, the one component of that is difficult to kind of explain or quantify is whether or not the development would have taken place anyways.
Yes.
Talking to businesses and developers and people that are investing, more often than not, this grant or this incentive is what is kind of convincing them to do their money. They're thinking about it, but they're right on that edge, and without it, they are more often than not pulling out or not investing, especially as it comes to reuse buildings or reinvestment, because there is an inherent risk as you open up walls and you don't really know what you're going to find. The benefit, I think, is that we are seeing deteriorated buildings being reinvigorated that are primed for businesses to now step in and are now becoming even higher contributing buildings to our tax base based on the increased assessment. So I think that's probably the biggest benefit to the community as a whole.
Okay. For what it's worth, my value statement on that is that if this is providing that extra piece of motivation for somebody to take the step forward and do it, I'm certainly in favor of having that incentive available to them. It just comes down to the ultimate decision of from where you draw the resources. We have no other incentive programs or incentive funding for anything like this else we're doing. These programs are it.
We have a capital program available or administered through Reconstruction for nonprofits, but that's about as much as I know, at least.
So that's associated with CFEP, right?
You defer to Haley. CCPG, how it's administered is a little bit out of my comfort zone to explain.
It's connected to that, yes, Councillor Kaufman.
Okay, thank
like
you.
It's a passive component.
Okay, and that's in trouble because I believe the provincial government also cut CFEP in the last budget, did they not?
Yeah, it's pretty tough to get projects approved under that CFIP. So the community groups need to find, fundraising or alternative revenue or funding sources for those projects.
Okay, thank you.
It's getting harder anyways, yeah.
I'm sorry?
It's getting harder for them to
yes.
get funding, from the province.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Spillman.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Kaufman, sorry, may I just add something?
Sure.
While it's not our funding, when we designate something as a municipal historic resource, they can go for grants, but that is getting harder to get as well because they're competing with more and more places for less and less money on a regular basis. So it's getting hard for any building, for any of the places they might get money to find it. And I think that's why we put this slate together as a city.
Okay, thank you for that.
I guess related to that, Mr. Malcolm, if there's the prospect of these policies expiring, would that help spur applications?
I'm not sure. I think it probably would. The risk, or I don't know if it's a risk, but I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I think I have just enough funding if we make the existing funding flexible to cross the different programs. I think based on the applications that I have in receipt, I think we're about tapped out. And of course, we handle these based on the order that they come in. So starting with the one that I guess came in the latest, and working our way to the most recent. And again, right now it appears that all our funding would be utilized, but I do have to go through and make sure that everything that's being applied for is actually eligible.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thanks, Mr. Malcolm. I'm just wondering, there's just a threshold of eligibility that people need to meet, or applicants need to meet. There isn't a ranking.
Yeah, we just have, if an applicant meets the eligibility requirements, then we provide the funding. We do not provide a competitive ranking process. That was something that we actually removed through the amendments, and again, treated it as first come, first serve, because what we were hearing is on the development front is they can't wait for the annual intake. If there's an opportunity to purchase a building or to advance on a development, it needs to be something that they can get a response in a matter of weeks on.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this when we removed that I understand the concerns from that end, but the concerns from my end is the first past the post may not be the highest and best use of the dollars. Number 5 may be. So I'm wondering if that's something we could go back to, and it doesn't have to be annually, maybe every 6 months. I just don't know. But further to that, that's just musings, I guess. What are you looking for today, Mr. Malcolm? Is it direction from our committee to council about, I think the 3 options you gave, which was find more funding, put a bow on it, or allow me some flexibility? What are you looking for?
I think our main purpose today was just to share an update, and then indicate that this is something that we're looking at. And I'm going to let Michael correct me if he sees things differently, but I think our desired direction would be to come back to the next economic SPC with a little bit more information as it relates to those 3 options.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Was that?
Pretty much. A couple things to point out is in the resolution that council passed about the incentives, required us to, asked us, not required, us to come and report back by the March 31st, which seemed to be a one-time thing instead of an ongoing report back. And in light of our success with with a couple of the programs, we suggest, as Andrew just said, that we come back more quickly than another quarterly report to give you some options for consideration, and then that would give us direction.
Thanks. And if I can, Mr. Mayor, would the next meeting of Economic SPC be too quick, or is that an appropriate turnaround time?
April 7th.
But,
April 21 is another option.
21 would be great. That gives us a little bit of time.
When are we doing CIP again?
May 10th.
Okay, so that, excellent. If the 21st would work for you, that's probably what I'd be willing to move, that this come back in front of Economic SPC on the 21st.
Okay, we could add that to the resolution at the end. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from council? Okay, I see none. This is good news. Thank you, Mr. Malcolm and Mr. Kelly, for the report. I have a resolution from Councillor Carlson, Vice Chair Carlson, Development-Based Incentives Policy. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receive the report as information, and further, that an update be provided on at the Economic Policy Committee of April 21st.
I think that wording makes sense. I'm looking for nods from Mr. Kelly or Mr. Malcolm that they understand that, then yes. Oh, Ms. Pinkson had her hand up. I don't know if she wanted to correct me on something.
Hey, Ms. Pinkson?
Just wondering if we need to have a specific date where we might need to just wait until after CIP. Just things are starting to pile up.
That kind of was in my mind as well. How about a specific date would the end of May work, or the end of June? If Mr. Malcolm is saying that we're getting a lot of action on this, I'd rather have a decision or some thoughts sooner rather than later is my only concern.
No meeting in May except for the CIP, and the June meeting is the 23rd for the Economic SPC.
Okay, could it be provided to a city council meeting, or does it have to come to a standing policy committee meeting?
Could go direct to council if that's what you would like.
We can leave that option open, and further that an update be provided by the third week in May, something like that, or by.
Yeah, I think it just gives us a bit more flexibility.
And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with it going. We've explored it quite a bit and had a good discussion here. I'm fine with it going to council rather than coming back here first. So if that's a better route, I'm okay with that.
Okay, that would be May the 18th. So I'll amend the motion.
Let's go with, if I may the 18th is right after CIP. I don't think that actually allows staff much more time. If we go with June 1, Your Worship.
Okay.
No later than, if they're ready, great.
Okay. Be provided no later than June 1st. Okay. Thank you. Any feedback from members of council? All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, now we'll move on to 5.1. Community Section D, CIP 2022 to 2031 projects. Who is leading this?
I think these are just for information, Your Worship. I think they're the sheets that we discussed today. So these are the ones that will form the CIP. So I think we're just accepting them as information.
Okay. And that's what the resolution says, moved by Councillor Carlson. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receive the presentation and report as information from Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. I wasn't sure if Haley wanted to give us any information on it or if we're okay just to accept.
If I may, Mayor Spearman and Councillor Carlson, I just wanted to highlight that as these days are presented, those sheets will be added to the website to create a working draft document for budget deliberation week. So those sheets continue to be updated on the website, and I can send the link in the chat if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? All in favor?
Yep.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, we've got next motion is by Vice Chair Carlson, omnibus motion, closed session. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee direct that the closed meeting discussions and documents with respect to investments and tax deadlines and penalties remain confidential to sections 21, harmful to intergovernment relations, 23, local public body confidences, 24, advice from officials, and 25, harmful to economic and other interests of a public body, of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Did we provide any direction or not? Or should we? Ms. Pinkston, did you require some direction out of that presentation, the second presentation?
Councillor Carlson, I'm good to proceed.
Okay, thank you. Then I will just call for the vote.
Question has been called. All in favor? Any opposed? There are none. Thank you. Okay, final resolution from Councillor Carlson for adjournment, that we do now adjourn the meeting of the Economic Standing Policy Committee until Wednesday, April the 7th, 2021.
It's not midnight yet.
Yep.
Call for the vote.
Question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks. I'll see you tomorrow, most of you.
What?
Governance tomorrow. Yay!
Bye-bye.
Bye.